Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Tracy, and if you don't know me, I have a passion for upcycling clothing and I teach sewing on here. I have a new sewing pattern for you guys this week, so I know it's been a while since I've posted anything, but I really hope you guys enjoy this new design. Yes, I know it's very revealing, but I kind of wanted to try something a little bit more low cut, and I did. It's very low cut. I feel like I'm about to spill out here. I definitely recommend putting a lot of boob tape everywhere to just keep this in place. And I created the digital sewing pattern, so it's available on my Etsy shop, so I have linked it down below. This dress doesn't have a closure, so you're welcome to put in a back zipper if that's what you want, because it is easier to get the dress on if you add a zipper, but I'm able to slip it on over my head. It is a little tight and snug, but I was able to get into it, so it works. The materials needed for this dress are 100% Silk Charmeuse, so you're going to need about 2.5 yards and then 2.5 yards of a silk crepe de Chine to line it. For this dress, I decided to not overlock my seams. I ended up pinking them just because I know everyone doesn't have an overlocker, so I kind of wanted to show you a different way to finish a silk dress. I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial, and please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. So I wanted to share my process from start to finish on this dress. So for this dress, I wanted a plunge neckline, so you can see my style lines are towards that waist at the halter top, and then I have a princess going through the bust, and then I decided I want to slit. I feel like whenever I think of a design, it's always in my head, and I should probably sketch it more often, but and this is what my idea is. And I do not use muslin to drape my garments just because I like to make dresses out of silk, and silk loves to grow, especially on the bias, so I'm draping on the bias, and silk falls completely differently than a cotton muslin does, which is why I don't use it. I feel like I get a more accurate drape and a pattern. I love seeing my vision come to life, and then I remove it from the dress form and actually put it on paper to make a pattern. So I start by laying out paper on the floor, and then I put down my silk, and you want to line up all the edges with the paper, so you want to lay everything completely flat and make sure nothing's curving. So you want to just drop down a line and square off your fabric, if that makes sense. And I'm just pinning all the edges and corners. So I lay down my pattern pieces, and I'm just making sure the straight grain on the pattern matches the straight grain on the fabric. So I'm just making sure everything's parallel with each other by using my ruler. Once I check that the straight grain is parallel to the straight grain on the pattern, then I just pin the pattern pieces down, and I just repeat it to the other ones as well. And this is what my pattern pieces look like on my fabric. So don't forget that the cup pieces, you're gonna have to mirror image them and cut out 2 more, so you have a right and a left side of the bust. And the fun part, so I'm just taking the rotary cutter and my cutting mat and placing it under and just cutting out my pattern pieces. A rotary cutter makes it so easy to just cut silk. It's like butter. So just repeat this to all of the pieces, and don't forget to cut out your mirrored images of the cups. And I recommend doing the paper, fabric, and then pattern on top method, because silk loves to move around and it's super finicky, so it really just keeps everything in place, and the silk doesn't shift at all. And now I'm completely done cutting out the lining. So don't forget that the lining pattern pieces are 1/8 of an inch smaller. So now I'm just going to repeat all of these steps, but with my main Silk Charmeuse. So I used a silk crepe de Chine for the lining, and this is my Silk Charmeuse, and then I'm just doing the same exact stuff, so just repeat. And since everything's cut out now, you're gonna just take every single piece and just do a stay stitch at all of these seams. So you want to do it at the slit seams, at the waist seam, so everything besides the hem, because you want to keep the silk from growing. So I'm just taking it to the machine and just doing a 1/4 inch stay stitch all the way around my pieces. So the lining and your silk fabric. So kind of carry your pattern to the machine because you don't want to let it hang, because you want to prevent as much growth as possible. And adjust your sewing machine so it's a longer stitch length. So I'm turning mine up all the way to 5, and then I just sew along all of my pieces. After stay stitching all of your pieces besides the skirt hemline, you're going to just set everything aside and just grab your lining and your main fabric cup pieces. Don't forget to mark all of your notches on your pattern pieces. So I have the lining on the left and my main fabric on the right. So now we can actually start sewing the cups together. So you're just going to start by sewing the shells together. Take right sides together and just match up your notches and pin. So you're just gonna pin along that princess seam and then repeat it to the other cup, and then just repeat to your lining. So you're literally just gonna sew all of these seams at once. It's easiest to just like pin everything and then take it all to your sewing machine. Take your pieces to the sewing machine and set your stitch length to a size 2. It's best to stitch with a smaller stitch for silk fabrics, and don't forget to also use a silk needle. I have a 7D10 on my machine, and you're just going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance on your main fabric and your lining. And I decided to go ahead and pink all of my seams so they don't fray. And these are pinking shears, so it cuts like in a triangle format, so it's cut on the bias and your seams don't fray at all. So I love these scissors. It makes it really easy to like do nice seams on the inside of silk fabric. When I'm using my pinking shears, I only make sure to cut off about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Don't go too close to the stitch or you're gonna like cut a stitch, and that's not good. Very important to press your seams as you go. So right now I'm just going to press all of these seams open after I pinked them. I find it easiest to iron a curved seam on this like ham. That's what we call them. We call them like these little iron hams. So then I just like kind of like move the seam around it to make it like as flat as possible, because I find it super difficult to do this on a flat like ironing board. Repeat this to all of your seams, and when you're ironing silk you want to be very careful that your setting is on a low setting, and I like to use steam, but just be careful not to damage your silk. After pressing the seams, you can see the cups actually have room for a bust, so it'll give it that really nice curved shape. And we can attach the lining to the main fabric now. So you're going to just place right sides together, and you want to pin at the front of the neckline, so that's like the straight part of the cup. So you're just going to pin all the way down and do the same to the other side. After pinning your cup lining and your main fabric together at the neckline, you can take it to your sewing machine and just sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way straight down. Don't forget to back tack, and next just pink that seam, so trim off a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take it to your iron and just press that seam, and then you're going to want to press that seam towards the lining because we're going to do an understitch. Once you press the seam towards the lining, you can see it's like really flat, so you're just going to do an understitch. So when you understitch, you're stitching about like 1/8 of an inch away from that seam line, so literally right next to it. This is going to help the fabric fold under, so it'll be really clean on the outside of the garment. That's what the understitch looks like on the lining, and you can see it already wants to roll back. So on the lining you're going to use the iron and just iron it out. So now it completely lays flat, and you're just going to do it to the other side, and you can see how like crisp and clean that center front neckline is. And now we need to add that tab that's on the side of the cup. So on pattern piece number 2, you'll see I have a notch right there indicating where you want to place that tab. So you're going to take some spaghetti. I'll show you in a second how to make spaghetti if you don't know how to. I trim it to 2 inches, and then I take the ring and just like put the strap through it so I have a miniature tab, and then I just place the tab right on that notch. So you want to pin it on the main fabric, so pin it on your main silk. Then I proceed to take a needle and thread, and I'm just basting this tab in place so like nothing shifts around, because I really don't trust just having a pin there and like it not shifting around. And then you're gonna take your lining and like flip it over so you're like encasing that tab, if that makes sense. So you're like all pretty sides are facing each other, and then you're gonna pin along that armhole. So you're just pinning, and then you're going to take it to the sewing machine and sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way up. And this is what the cup's going to look like. So you want to just remove that basting stitch we made for that tab, and then just trim that seam allowance with your pinking shears. So trim off a 1/4 inch. Turn the cup right side out, just kind of shake it and it'll turn right side out. So now we need to understitch that seam, so you're going to want to push all that seam allowance towards the lining. So this is going to get kind of difficult. You're not going to be able to understitch the whole seam. As you can see, I'm only able to get like 3/4 of the way up, but you want to just back tack as far as you can get. So I like removed that piece on my sewing machine so it's smaller and I can actually fit most of the like cup in there, and just understitch as far as you can. Like I said, it'll still look great, so don't worry about it. Pull the lining under and just use your iron to press it. So press on the inside of the cup, and you can see it looks really nice. So now for these straps, I'm going to show you how to actually make spaghetti. So you're going to just take your fabric and you're going to cut about 2-inch wide strips. So I like to just start it, and then I like to just tear silk. It tears so easily and this part's so satisfying. So I end up having 3 strips, and I'm just gonna make the spaghetti. So I take it to the sewing machine, fold it in half, and then just sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way. And you can see my small stitch. So now I'm just taking my pinking shears and trimming off the excess and only leaving about like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And to turn this spaghetti right side out, I just take a safety pin, pin it against the seam allowance, and then kind of like turn it and push it into the strap. And I do this like push and pull method. I hope that makes sense. You can also use like a loop turner, but I personally find that this like safety pin method works best for me, especially with these small thin straps. After turning them right side out, I just take it to the iron and just press them so they're like completely flat. You can also make your spaghetti on the bias, but I personally like to do my straps on the straight grain. I feel like they're sturdier. You can sew in our straps now, so take your cup and turn it inside out. And you're just going to take your spaghetti and just feed it through until you can see some of it sticking out at the top. And you want to push your spaghetti to either side so it is completely flush when it's like on the right side of the fabric. I used a safety pin to feed them through. It made it a lot easier. I hate having so many pins in the way, so it's easier if I just like baste it in place. Take it to the sewing machine and sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and don't forget to back tack on either end so your stitches don't unravel. And you can see I already stitched it, so now I'm just like removing all of that basting stitch. Grab your pinking shears to trim off all of this seam allowance because it's going to be very bulky when you turn it right side out. So you can see I'm trimming at an angle around the corners just because it will make them more squared when we turn it out. And then just trim it down to like a 1/4 inch seam allowance at the top, so pretty close. And then you're just gonna grab these straps from the inside and just like pull it, so you'll see you'll have a really nice clean finish of the straps, and everything is encased on the inside of this halter. So excited to see it on the dress form, so I just pinned it up to see what it would look like. The dress is very revealing, so you can opt out of doing slits on the dress and you can just sew along the princess seams on the skirt. And you can also add a back zipper if you want. I don't have a zipper, I can slip this dress on fine, but you're welcome to add one. It does make it easier to put on. I ended up like doing both straps crossing with 2 tabs on the top, but then I realized when I finished the dress that you should only do the tabs on the side, and then the strap closest to the neck, that one should just tie around your neck, if that makes sense. So you only have 1 set of straps crossing in the back and the other tying around the neck. Now we can sew the skirts together, so you want to make sure you marked the notches for the slits on the front and the back of the skirt, as well as the lining pieces. I'm taking the back skirt and I'm grabbing the front skirt and placing right sides together. I'm pinning at those princess seams and I'm only pinning up to the notch. After you pin the princess seams, you can take it to the sewing machine and sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Don't forget to back tack when you hit that notch because that's going to be the start of your slit. And repeat these steps to your main skirt. So this was the lining and you can see I just did the main skirt, so it's pretty self-explanatory. And now I'm starting with the lining. I'm just gonna like press that seam open, and you also want to do that to the main skirt as well. Start by pressing the seam first and then you can press it open, and this makes the seam look very flat when you like turn it right side out. Before we attach the cups to this skirt, you need to just like stay stitch the bottom of the cups, if that makes sense. So now you want to take your skirt, so I'm taking the main skirt and just marking a 1/2 inch on the seams so I can line up the bust and the skirt so that seam like matches up perfectly. And then I just take a pin and like put a pin through the seam and then make sure I grab the other side. So I like to make sure it's like exactly gonna line up. Now that the seams line up and right sides are facing each other, you can just start by pinning the rest of the cup around the skirt. So I'm just pinning towards the center front, so make sure you notch everything so you know where you have to place the cup. So the center front and that princess seam, and then you'll have a notch towards the back of the skirt, so just pin it and then just pin the other cup down, so you're just repeating these same steps. Once I finish pinning the cups into place, I like to take a needle and thread and just baste them so nothing shifts around, and it makes it so much easier when you attach the lining. So now that everything's basted, I removed the pins except for the ones on the princess seam just to keep it more secure. Now you can grab your lining, and you're gonna have the right side of the lining face the right side of the lined cups, if that makes sense. So you're gonna just start by lining up the right side of the lining princess seams to the right side of the lining cup seam, as you can see. So I'm just placing it there and starting to pin. So I'm just matching up that center notch and then the princess seams. Now that you attach the lining at the center front and princess seams, you're going to just like kind of go inside the lining skirt and then grab the whole garment and like flip it inside. I hope this is making sense, but you're just like putting everything inside, because then when you sew the waist, it's taking everything and like encasing it, so it's like a really clean finish when it's on the outside. So now you want to just continue pinning the rest of the lining to the main skirt. So I ended up adding these tabs at the end of where the halter ends towards the back, just because I wanted to do 2 sets of crossing straps. But like I said, don't do this tab. You're gonna have a more secure dress if you just don't do these. I finished pinning the entire waist, and then I just took it to the sewing machine and sewed a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And there are a lot of pins, so you could have basted this again and then taken it to the machine. So I'm just sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and don't forget to back tack when you start and stop. After sewing the waist, you can just remove that basting stitch we made for the cups and take your pinking shears. You want to trim this waist seam allowance 1/4 inch. Now that the waist is completely pinked, we want to turn the dress right side out, so you can see how it looks so clean on the inside and the outside. but we want to do an understitch so that lining will roll back. So you want to push all that seam allowance at the waist towards the lining, and you're just going to do an 1/8 of an inch understitch. And I'm just holding the fabric taut so I can get really close to that seam. And you could have pinned the seam allowance towards the lining, but I just like to go under and grab and make sure that everything's in the right place. Trim all of the excess threads, and now you can see that the lining wants to roll under. So you're just going to put the lining inside the dress and then just start ironing on the inside of the dress. So iron the lining back so you can see your fingers will just like push it back, like the same exact thing we did with the cut pieces. Now that the skirt and the skirt lining are sewn in, we can move on to the slits of this dress. Start at the bottom of the slits and turn them in a 1/2 inch and just pin them in place. So you're going to do this all the way to the top of the seam. So you're just pinning a 1/2 inch, and you're doing this on the wrong side of the lining and on the wrong side of your skirt. So after you pin everything in place, you can see it's looking like an open slit. So you're just going to take it to your iron and just steam that and like crease it. So you want like a clean, crisp line. And don't worry, these are glass head pins, so it's not going to melt. So I like to steam over the pins to keep everything in place. And just repeat that to all of the other slits on this dress, and you can remove the pins. I recommend pinking everything now, so just pink all the way back up to that seam and do it to all of the seams. After you prep all of the slits, I recommend you hem the lining right now. So you can do a baby hem or you can just overlock it. I just did an overlock just because it was faster. Now we can finish off the slits. So you can see how clean they already look, but now we're going to actually sew the lining to the main shell of the dress. So you can see I'm lining up the start of the slit with the start of the main skirt. So I'm pinning the lining to the skirt at the start point of the slit, and then I'm putting wrong sides together, and I'm kind of putting the lining like a 1/16 of an inch behind the main skirt at the slit, as you can see. So it's like behind it because we're going to do a 1/4 inch top stitch. So you want to pin the slits together and do the same thing to the other side. I never trust my pins with silk, it's just too finicky, so I'm just taking my needle and thread and basting this whole slit together. It's also going to make it easier when I'm actually doing the top stitch around the whole slit. Remove all of the pins and you can see how nice it's going to look. So just take it to the sewing machine and just follow that 1/4 inch line on your machine. So you're doing a 1/4 inch top stitch. Don't forget to back tack when you start. And when you reach the start of the slit, you're going to go up a 1/4 inch and then pivot your foot and then go across and then go back down a 1/4 inch. Remove your basting stitches and just take it to your iron and iron on the wrong side of the dress, and this will just help the whole like slit be as flat as possible. We are so close to being done, so now we can actually do the hem of the dress. So you want to just stay stitch a 1/4 inch on your hem, and make sure you actually let your dress hang for 24 hours before you do the hem so you can let it grow. And do the stay stitch, and now you can just do a double fold. So this is called a baby hem. This is just like me doing it really fast, but if you need an in-depth tutorial, I will link one. Now that the dress is hemmed, I will show you how I make my straps adjustable. So I recommend the straps next to your neck, those ones that you don't cross and attach it to a tab. So I suggest only doing the one set of tabs up top at the side, not the bottom tabs. So the top ones don't need adjustable sliders. Those you will just tie like a normal halter, but then the other set of straps you'll tie and make them adjustable at the sides. So I'm just taking the strap and looping it up and through the slider, as you can see. I take the strap and feed it through the ring on the tab, and I just like pull a good amount through, and then I'm grabbing the slider portion and kind of lifting the strap up. That makes sense, and kind of giving myself some space to feed the bottom of the strap through. So you're just going to take the bottom of that strap and go up and down in between the strap that's looped up, if that makes sense. So just watch what I'm doing. I think it makes more sense if you just watch. So you're going up and down, and then now you can like pull on the bottom of the strap. And just make it shorter so you have like a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then you're going to do a double fold and pin it in place, and you can just hand sew this part down. And now you have adjustable straps. I forgot to mention that the shorter straps that attach at the side of the halter, those ones I ended up trimming them to 20 inches and the longer ones are 25 inches. So the longer ones should go around your neck. And finally, we're on the last step. So just go ahead and iron your hem and your dress is done. If you make this dress, please tag me on Instagram. I would love to see it. And thank you guys so much for watching.